Okay, we can go ahead and begin. Good afternoon to everyone. So a few things to speak about before we dive into our lecture is that assignment one is due this Sunday, so just be aware of the deadline. Uh, and just keep in mind they have 2 days after the deadline to submit the assignment. But obviously, there's a late penalty that is um, will be penalized. And in our last lecture, where we did John the Ripper lab, and we weren't able to really crack the password. And that is kind of something that is could happen that the tool does not function accurately. But some of the reasons why it would not work, or kind of like ways we can fine tune or the results or the process of cracking the password is that first is that we are not using the correct hash. So when last lecture, when we made a user and we set a password for the given user, obviously we know the password are stored into hashes, right? And the idea comes into play is that the hash that is being stored could be like SHA-12. And usually Linux passwords, we're going to have a few lectures on Linux in the upcoming lectures or throughout the semester, is that a Linux password, when you create a user, is usually stored as SHA-512. That is what it normally uses. What tends to happen is that in the last lecture, we used a different hash function, crypt. So that could not really kind of like uh, crack the password. So that is one. So that is one, you could say, reason or one issue, really. And to check that, what you can do is you can do something like um, John and then list. This is recorded, so I mean you guys can go back to it and equal formats, and then you can find like how is the passwords are being exactly listed. Okay, so you can try to find the password that is being stored and the format of that password. And then you can try to like set that format. So it is going to be the same kind of command that we had. This is just a little bit of something that is abstract. We use maybe SHA-512 and then hash.txt. Okay, so that is one way. So that could be one issue. The other issue is obviously we know that passwords have salts that are added to them to kind of rise the complexity of the password and the way they are stored. So that could be also one thing. Um, but that is usually not the case because we tried with a simple password like 12345 or one. So it should be able to crack it. The second thing it could be is that the password is not in the list. So that is also something to check for. So you can do John and then hash.txt, okay, to find the password if it's on the list or not. And I think the last thing that is there is that the password could be cracked, but it's not being shown. So the way we show that is we use John and then show hash.txt. And that is for you to check if the password has been cracked, if it does not really show as an output. Okay, so that's on the last lecture that we had. Kind of some ways you can kind of mitigate the process if you're not being able to crack the password. Okay, so obviously we're in week four, and so we're gonna wrap up chapter three today, and which is about authentication. Um, does anyone have any questions, any concerns before we start? Okay, so we can go ahead and start. So we know that this chapter is dedicated kind of to you could say authentication specifically, and we talked about authentication in terms of passcodes so far. So we want to know what are the other types of authentications, identifications, verification, varieties that we do have, and obviously when it comes to security. So this is what the lecture that is going to be today dedicated about, and we will have kind of a nice, cool case study towards the end that can kind of like wrap the overall idea of this chapter, and then we will conclude. It's really slow. That's good. So in the first chapter of chapter 3, we talked about passwords. So we moved from password-based authentication, you could say, to token-based authentication. Okay. And we know that passwords rely really on actually what you know. So we know that there's password attacks, there is password vulnerabilities in given system, and authentication is broken if the password is cracked or stolen. To reduce the risk, what we can do is system add what you have. And what you have, we mean something that is physical. Okay, so we have physical tokens that provide an extra layer of user authentication. Okay, so just to give you an example, a token is kind of like you can have a physical card, like a UCF ID card that allows you to access a specific lab or a specific room within the building. Okay, so that is something that you actually have. So obviously, there is going to be a vulnerability with that, but that is going to be on a very lower, you can say, rank of vulnerability. So cards are one of the most common authentication tokens that we have. So what are the card types we have? We have embossed, we have magnetic stripe, we have memory, smart, contactless, and obviously there's a variation of these cards. One obviously can store data. One would also has like a microchip in it that can like, or a memory that can like have electrical contacts that is exposed in the service, or kind of has like RFID chips that are installed within these physical cards that you can use for like Apple Pay. You can use for many things. So magnetic stripe card would be like a bank card that you have a stripe on the back of it, and then you can swipe it at a card reader, and then you would be obviously to authorize a specific purchase. Now, these bank cards now actually have chips in the front, so you can use it as a chip. You don't have to just swipe it. Memory is like a prepaid phone card, and like smart contactless cards is biometric ID card that can have a memory inside and a processor inside as well. So meaning like it has a memory so it can record your credentials and has a processor to process actually to grant you kind of given access. So these are cards that authenticate user based on possession, and we have each card type stores or carries identifying information. And then we have more advanced cards that offer stronger protection or stronger, you can say, robustness than ours. So these cards are widely used in banking, access control, and identity systems. So we talk about memory cards, right? First, and those are cards that can store information, but really does not process data. And the most common one is the magnetic stripe card. And that can also include something that is like an electronic memory. And then this could be used for hotels. When you go to a hotel like Hilton, they would give you one of those cards that has a memory to access your room, and also to an ATM. Okay, so this provides significantly greater security when combined with a password or PIN, meaning that if we add another layer of security to these cards, like a PIN, it would kind of be a greater security, you could say, method, or you can say kind of technique, such that you use the card to process the memory, maybe to locate your account, and then you have a PIN on your ATM to get access to your account. So the drawbacks of memory cards include that it requires a special reader, and we're going to talk about these special readers today, or you can say like the protocols with these readers, and obviously loss of a token, such that when we lose the physical card, we will not be able to get access to that specific system or location. So that's what we do is we usually use kind of like multi-layer of authentication, whether it's a memory card or something that is PIN based. And it could be something like where user doesn't really like the preference of having something like this for authentication. Smart tokens. So the smart tokens are also physical characteristics. They contain a small built-in processor, and they often look like a credit card or a bank card. And they can also appear as key fobs or maybe some small handheld devices. So it requires obviously user input using there's a keypad or a display, and others can connect to it directly to a reader or a computer. Something like where you have a pass key and you have to kind of put that firm physical token to get access to that system. So the authentication message we have is that there could be a static authentication where we use the same stored value each time. We can have dynamic passwords that generates a new code each time you log in. And this could be something like where you log into your UCF domain, and the password that is dynamic, it changes every time. Or a challenge response. So we have to respond to a system challenge. Okay, this could be a security question. It could be anything that is related to your given account. So most important category of a smart token that we have has obviously has the appearance of a credit card, has an electronic interface that can be used, and can support multi smart token authentication methods. Hey, can we quiet over there, please? Yeah. And it contains obviously a microprocessor, and this microprocessor has obviously a processor memory and has an input and output interference. And these kind of given memory kind of includes three kind of types of memories. The one is that read-only memory, and that stores data that does not change during the card's life. So that is kind of like static given memory that does not change. We have electronical, erasable, programmable, which is called the EEPROM, that it kind of holds application data and programs data, meaning that we can kind of modify the memory on that given card. And we have random access memory that holds temporary data that is generated when applications are executed. So just a comparison, we have memory cards, we have smart tokens, and we have smart cards. So really, smart cards and smart tokens are on the same umbrella. They're in the same given token. The difference is that with memory cards, they only store data, right? They have no kind of way to process. There's no processing capabilities, and authentication is going to be handled by the reader or the system, not the card itself, okay? So the physical system that we have that will grant you access. So the problem with that, it's easier to clone, copy, or anything can happen to it. So those are kind of like prepaid cards or magnetic stripe cards. The smart tokens and smart cards can and store data and perform processing, and it has a built-in microprocessor. So it can do authentication itself, and it supports dynamic challenges and response methods. And for smart cards like bank cards or credit cards, they can also have a processor, memory, and interference. So they can perform authentication securely on the given card itself. So this is how it would work, right? For smart cards and reader communication. We have a smart card, which is a physical kind of token, and we have a card reader. And this is kind of the architecture, or you can say the steps that would fall under these, right? So if we have a smart card, really the authentication is not really done by the, if we have a memory card, the authentication is really not done by that memory card. So smart cards, they can do authentication. So the smart card and reader will have a secure communication session. That is the first step that happens between the smart card and the card reader. And then both sides agree on how they will talk to each other. That is usually like the protocol, negotiations, and commands and responses are exchanged during that session. So the card does not act alone, and all these actions happen through a controlled exchange within the reader. So the first thing that we have is the ATR and the PTS, the protocol negotiations. And what happens is that we start with ATR, answer to reset. So the card sends basic information after power up, okay? And then PTS that is being sent and reader and card have to agree on a communication settings. It could be like byte stream or block of data that is being sent between the card reader and the smart card. So why the reason we have protocols is that because we know that protocol ensures given rules for us kind of to communicate, whether it's TCP, UDP, every given device has a protocol, and that protocol has to be involved for both kind of, you can say a node, and you can say maybe two users, a server and a client, for them to communicate to achieve task or requests being made. So during this session, what would happen is that we have a command, and this can be like an HTTP command where we are requesting a specific object from maybe UCF or maybe from Amazon. And then we have a response. The response is by the card reader that sends back a result. Maybe when you go on Google and request a homepage, this is kind of like the typical process that would happen. And authentication secure operations actually gonna happen here. And then lastly, we have the session closure. And we know that we need to have a session closure such that like when we go to ATMs, sessions would kind of like obviously end right after you say, like if it asks you a question, obviously if you need anything else, or there's a time-based session ending. So communication will end and the data that is in the memory is gonna be cleared. So each session is going to be isolated, like unique from one to another, and that limits replay and reuse attacks. So we're going to cover replay and reuse attacks shortly. So we move to electronic or identity, so EID, and we have these EIDs now, and I think Florida doesn't have them yet for IDs. I think it's in other states where you can have your ID saved kind of virtually on your phone, and it can be used as a form of identification. And that is deployed across a lot of countries now. And we're going to cover one here today about Germany. So it uses a smart card, obviously the EID, and that EID is kind of like a national identity card for citizens, and it achieves kind of the same purposes as other national ID cards, where you can say physical tokens. And those similar cards can be like a driver license, it can be some sort of access to a government, commercial or kind of service or area. And you can provide stronger proof of identity, obviously, to be used in a variety of applications. So in this effect, the card has to be obviously verified by the national government or the given kind of like service or commercial service or government service to be kind of valid and authentic. And the most kind of one of the advanced deployments, which is kind of not advanced now, but in the topic of EIDs, is kind of the German card. I think it's called Newer. Has anyone been to Germany? You have? Oh, two? Did you? How long did you stay there? Spend? Was it vacation? A week? 2 weeks? How long did you stay there? Oh, 4 years? Oh, nice. It's a long time. Did you do like what? How old were you when you were there? Oh, teenager? Okay. So you did like elementary there, middle school? Middle school. You speak German? Okay, we have a slide here. Maybe you can do some translation. So this kind of card, the advanced card, the German card, you can say, has human readable data that is printed on the surface, and it can be used as an EID. It has personal data, document number, has card access number, which is CAN, machine readable zone, such that this card has a zone that can be kind of read by certain devices or scanners. So this is a picture that is referenced from Wikipedia about the German card. So the thing to highlight here is that we know there is information that is being stored on the card itself. And this could be any sort of identification for the actual, you can say user or maybe client. And it is also a smart card that has embedded microprocessor, similar to smart tokens or smart cards. It can support electronic authentication for online and in-person services, meaning it can be used online and offline. So we're going to talk about offline and online kind of authentication. It can be used obviously to log into government and commercial websites. has also an RF. So it kind of has all these advanced techniques that we do combine from variation of cards to have everything all in one. Okay, so the printed information on the card works like a traditional ID, but the chip itself enables secure digitally identification verification. So we have here, this table highlights kind of like given functions that we have and what it does and how access is granted and the typical use for those. Okay, so we have ePass that is mandatory. And this is kind of a function that is only used by government identity checks. So this is just like a government-based sort of authentication. You can say just a level of authentication. Like, for example, when you go to airports, this is kind of like this type of authentication, which is mandatory. Okay, so it either reads some sort of identification, and I think usually, I'm not sure when airports started implementing the face biometric, because it has not been there, like I think maybe what 5 years or more ago. But it could be kind of the actual physical identity, or it could be biometric data. Now, which would they have? You give your ID, and the ID is obviously crossed match. And we're going to talk about those patterns today, human physical facial patterns that can be used for authentication. So the access, how is it granted? Either by a card access number or a machine readable zone. Okay, an example of that we said, airport border control. The AID can be identification verification that is offline or online. Okay, so if it's online or offline, the access that is granted is either by a PIN, by a card access number. It can be by a password authentication connection establishment. So the typical use for those are like typical logins and age verifications. So that is accessing maybe a government portal. And the e-sign-in is kind of like creates legally binding digital signatures similar to actual digital signatures. And the access for that is going to be PINs, signing electronic documents, or signing an electronic or digital contract. So the offline that we have, offline use, is there's no really connection to an EID server. So we're going to cover EID servers here in a minute. But basically, offline, we are not making any connection to a server to grant us authentication, identification, or verification. So data is directly coming from the card itself. Okay, so we use the CAN or the MRZ for access. So this is common in physical inspections, right? And then the border control or police ID checks. Online use is where we are requiring some sort of communication channel, or you can say connection to the central ID server. Okay, so you basically have credentials for identification, and there's a server that verifies your given identity, right? This is common in maybe government or commercial uses. So if you log into like a government portal, this would be something like that. So this is how it would be done with the EID server. So we have the EID server, we have the host/application. The host/or application could be something like an FBI terminal, right? And we have a user, and that user has credentials. And we talked about how users initially gain credentials. And the beginning chapter, the beginning portion of chapter 3 is obviously they register and they get token. Those tokens are their credentials that will be used, whether it's physical or kind of like digital. So the user obviously would kind of contact or request that service via web browser, because we're here talking about online. You can say request or accessing. So there's a service request that is being made by the user in step 2. And then step 3, which is the hosted application, will redirect to the EID message. And this EID server kind of is like an active directory. It just kind of contains all the information that we have about the users. Similarly to when we have like a hash file analytics directory. So obviously the authentication request is being made. Something is going to be asked from the client to be entered, and then user will enter that given PIN or that given authentication, whether it's a physical card or a PIN. Authentication is going to be exchanged between the client and the EID server. And really, you're not going to go through all these steps. It's all done in kind of like very quick in seconds. But this is what's happening on the background. So authentication, obviously, there's going to be a result from the server, and the authentication is forwarded, and the service is granted. Okay, so that is how authentication works with the EID servers that we have. Now we have PACE, which is password authenticated connection establishment, and basically they just want to ensure that these given RF chips on in the EID card cannot be read without explicit access control. So really information on the EID or on that chip cannot be just read. You have to have some sort of access control. And our next chapter is going to be about access control. And basically those are like privileges by permissions based. For online application, access is established by the user entering the PIN. And we know that this is kind of like the PIN for the card holder. And for offline applications, they have to use the MRZ that is printed on the physical card, or the 6-digit number or the 6-digit access number that is uniquely attached to the card. So we move into biometric authentication. And this is obviously biometric is anything that is related to physical characteristics, right? So we moved from passwords, right? And you can say that is logical passwords. And then we move to smart cards, you can say tokens, and memory cards, and now to biometric. So we use kind of like physical features of the users to verify their identity, okay? And this is based on pattern recognition. So complex and expensive when compared to password and tokens. So this is kind of the, and obviously different enterprises will have kind of different way of authentication based on obviously what service they're providing and obviously what they can afford on you can say kind of like this is one factor that they have to consider. So the physical characteristics can include like facial characteristics, like something like Face ID, actual fingerprints, hand geometry, random pattern, iris, signature, and also voice. So this is kind of like you can say given you can say chart or graph kind of compares the accuracy across the cost of these given biometric authentication methods. Okay, so obviously the higher accuracy of the given biometric authentication method will have a higher cost. So iris is basically focusing on your inner kind of portion of your eye, and that is the highest and most expensive one. Okay, and you have obviously voice. Voice is you can say on the lower end in terms of cost, but in terms of accuracy, it also ranks the lowest. So Face ID, or you can say facial patterns, is actually a little bit in terms of cost low, and accuracy is actually low as well. Not saying that it is low in terms of authentication methods, because we use Face ID now most in our phones, and it does an amazing job. But here we are comparing it in correlation to other biometric authentication techniques. So these are the top three, you can say, iris, retina, and fingers to be used. Obviously, having the higher accuracy and well, actually, retina and finger have kind of similar cost to signature and face, but have a higher accuracy. So just keep in mind that when we have higher accuracy, it's going to cost more for the specialized equipment. So how are these biometric? Yes. Yeah.
So why do you think we switched over from face?
That's a good question, actually. So here, obviously, the way it's looking, it's maybe looking like it's a little bit close in terms of cost, but it could be that finger is a little bit costly than face. Here, obviously, on this chart, they're very close. But actually, the back end of the cost could be very high in terms of face. It could be kind of like kind of like user satisfaction, you could say, or preference, is to use Face ID more than finger, because some maybe you hurt your hand or your given finger. Users would tend to use their face kind of like more of a preference and style for kind of, because these kind of given, like especially Apple is known for to make their services kind of unique and kind of imply simplicity for them. So that's why maybe it could be used. So, I mean, that is a good question. Obviously, now we kind of have both. They're still being used as both. You have them on Mac. I think the latest Mac devices has finger printing still, right? Okay. So yeah, they use both. So that's a good question. So how are these biometric characteristics are being kind of extracted and stored? Is that the user itself is obviously going to provide some biometric sample. And this is kind of this technique or this kind of architecture is kind of generic for all biometric, you can say, authentication methods. So the user is going to provide some sample, maybe like a fingerprint, and we have some sort of sensor that can take that fingerprint and change the given, obviously, that data type into, we use feature extraction, and we store it into a database, okay? So that is stored in the database to be used. So the enrollment creates the reference data, and that data is being used for future authentication. So that is the first step. And then we have biometric verification, is that the user claims an identity, and often with a name or maybe a pen. So they may have to enter their fingerprint with a pen or name, and those extracted features are going to be compared here. So we still extract the fingerprints. Every time fingerprints are entered or any kind of biometric authentication method is entered, we still do feature extraction, right? And then we compare those features against the biometric database. And kind of like on a research range, to achieve something like this, we have convolutional neural networks, we have AI machine learning models to achieve these given patterns. And I think around 2017, 2018, a popular area of research was adversarial attacks or image classification, where we have kind of like a panda, and that panda is the actual ground truth label that we want to classify. We kind of mess with the image of the panda. We feed it to the classifier, and we are able to see if that panda, if that picture relates to a panda or not. Can we fool the model or not in terms of classifying? And this really works on basically feature extraction of the image. So the verification is going to answer the question, is the person who they claim to be, and that's obviously what we want to do. And what happens during identification is user does not claim identity. Obviously, a biometric is going to be also captured. Feature extraction is going to happen, and those are going to be compared against multiple templates, and the system will return the user identity. Okay, so there's a feature matcher here, and we have user identity or user unidentified. So this kind of answers who is the actual person, identification. So this is the biometric decision, and this kind of like graph kind of showcases or demonstrates how we let users in or not. And we know that in the past slide that we have here is that is basically based on a cross comparison between the biometric database and the feature matcher that we have. But this is how it's done on a graphical base, right? So we have a matching score, and obviously when the matching score of the feature comparison is high, we obviously grant access to the given user. So that is one thing to know. So every given biometric will have a result or a comparison matching score. So if we have a high score, they meaning that there's a higher cross comparison with the features that are in the database, then they will be granting access. What we have here is that we have, you can say, imposter scores, and these are usually low. This could be attackers. This could be also actual users, like clients of that given system. And this area, or you can say this left side of the graph, represents people who are not actual real users. This side is the genuine users, right? And these genuine users are the actual ones that we want to grant access to. right? And we have that set threshold that is kind of like decisive between them. It all really goes down back to numbers. So like we are working with numbers, and it's kind of like number comparison. What is the closest? So usually if the given client that we actually want to genuinely give access to has a higher threshold than to be actually matching the given features, then we grant access. And vice versa here. If it's on the less end, then we deny the access. But you can note here that these genuine users, there could be kind of like false non-match possible. And this kind of happens. Like sometimes when we use our Face ID, we put our face to get access, and sometimes it doesn't grant access to us. So that is something that is kind of like known. Also, the imposters themselves can kind of have some can go above the threshold to have kind of some sort of access, not really to have full access, but it could work in a sense. So the idea is that the threshold is decided based on a given organization, like what we want to achieve. Okay, so and this is how we really do it. So for example, the threshold that we have in green here from a forensic application, we want to set the threshold to be very low. So we want to find all possible matches. So we want to accept more false matches. And those results are obviously viewed by humans. So this is kind of very, you could say, a pro for criminal investigation or large biometric database searches. And we have high security authentication. And this is where we set the threshold very high. And we deny all the users or deny all the imposter profiles. And the goal of that is to prevent unauthorized access. So we accept more false rejections, and dishes are obviously automatic. So examples of those is like border control, secure governments and facilities, or military systems. Okay, so that is the decisive threshold that we have. So the biometric system produces two types of errors. And the first error that we have is false match, unauthorized access, or false non-match, where the user is rejected. So if we adjust the decision threshold, like we said, changes these errors. So if we have a higher or increment of the threshold, it's more secure and less convenient. Okay. If we have a lower or we decrease the threshold, it is more convenient but less secure. So that's what we talked about computer forensics. And obviously here the equal rate, error rate line, which is the dashed line, is both where errors are equal. So that is used to compare the biometric system. So usually biometric systems are going to happen to kind of like balance security and usability. So they choose kind of like a threshold for an operational point. We don't want to make it too complex where our actual user are going to get annoyed by the system. Why not make it too of a less of a threshold where actual malicious attackers can get access to our system? So there has to be kind of a balancing security and usability point. So this is the performance of all the biometric kind of, you can say, authentication methods that we have. Here we have them on basically on a graph, and the curve is going to show the trade-off between matches and false rejections. So if we have lower curves, which we have something with Iris, and we know Iris achieves the better in terms of accuracy, this will be on the lower kind of curve. We have fingerprint here, and fingerprint is kind of a strong balance between accuracy and usability. Hand is moderate accurate, and hand is the one that is here that we have. And voice and face are more convenient, but kind of less accurate than the other biometric authentication methods. So our last kind of portion of the chapter is remote user authentication. This is the last thing that we have to cover for authentication. So this kind of sums up everything. So remote user authentication is going to be done over a network, right? Like the internet or communication links is more complex. So there's additional threats that are being made. Okay, so there's eavesdropping, packet sniffing, MAC sniffing, you can say impersonation, playing an authentication sequence that has been observed. So it generally relies on some sort of a challenge. So we have to kind of have some kind of counterattack to these or protocol to counter these given threats. So this is kind of here from a network point of view is that, and this is kind of replay attacks, and this is how it could happen, is that we can ignore the IP address here from a security point of view, is that we have a password and we have a user ID like saying I am Alice, and we are logging into a system here, maybe that could be any type of system like Amazon or something like that. But here we have Alice and Bob, and Alice, what she wants to do is she wants to prove her identity to him, right? And Alice will send her IP address, she will send her password and say, I am Alice to Bob. So that is the first step that she does. What can happen is that Trudy can do a man-in-the-middle attack, and we know that man-in-the-middle attack has variations of attacks. She can kind of capture the given packet or the traffic that is being sent and replay the attack. And then Bob would say that is okay, and he would confirm. So that is one attack that we have with authentication over networks, is that Trudy would record all the packets and later plays it back to Bob. And then man in the middle is kind of like impersonation, or Trudy's acting like she's the actual user to both kind of given users that we have, Alice and Bob. So Alice is going to send her info to Bob, hoping that it would achieve Bob. But we have kind of Trudy that is acting in the middle to attain that information, or capture that information. So she would kind of act like she is Alice with Bob, and she would act as if she was Bob with Alice, right? And she would supply her private key, her public key to kind of Bob, and Bob would think that is Alice. She would do the same thing with Alice. She will take her given credentials like her private key and public key so she can open the messages. That could be the password that is being entered. So when Bob sends a message to obviously to Alice, Trudy, the attacker, has kind of she's able to recover the original message that is being sent, such that she's provided Bob with her private and public keys, so she can use her own keys to recover the message. She can send it to Bob as if to Alice as if Bob sent it, and there's really like a passive attack. She's observing what's being happening, and she can catch those given data that is being sent. So the way we challenge this, the way we counter these challenges is we have challenge response. And the first challenge response that we have is with passwords. So the way we do that is the user authenticating by identifying themselves. And this could be a user. So a user sends their username to the host, okay? And the server sends the random challenge. And the client combines the challenge with the password, and the server checks the response and allows or denies access. So why is this secure? Because is that the password is never sent over the network, and the random challenge prevents these replay attacks. So the user would log into a remote system. The server would send a random number, you can say a mouse number or kind of a key random number. The client hashes the number with the password and sends it back. So the server verifies the result and grants access. So we should know how that is being achieved with hashing. The other way that we have is with tokens. So all given kind of like these kind of techniques that we're going to cover or discover in the next slides all have a challenge response. But this time they're using tokens, and we know what tokens are. So the user here is going to identify or start the authentication. The server is always going to send a challenge, and a hardware token generates a response using its stored secrets. So the server verifies the response and allows or denies access. So why is this secure? Because the secret is stored inside the actual token, not the computer. And that can be an actual physical token, and the random challenge prevents also replay attacks. Because these kind of like the random challenge or the random number is a one-time use, okay? It's not to be used multiple times. So we can kind of know if it has been used multiple times. And if it has been, then it's kind of like in the hands of an intruder. So the user would insert a smart card or a token a button, and the server sends that random number. The token generates a one-time response, and the server verifies and grants access. And the last one is that we have with static biometrics. We have static biometric and dynamic ones. Okay, so same thing happens. The user is always going to do an authentication process by identifying himself. The server will send a random challenge, and there's going to be a sample that is captured. We know that with biometrics, and the server compares the biometric data to the stored template. So authentication is very robust here. We know that with biometric because it's based off on something that you are. So there's no password or token being used. So the limitation is that the biometric pattern is the same each time that is being originally stored the first given time. It could be a vulnerability if the biometric data is copied or replayed. So example is that user scans a fingerprint, the server compares it, like we said, to the given database across feature comparison, and access is going to be granted. The last one we have is dynamic. So dynamic is going to be kind of more robust than static because it changes every time and prevents replay and recording attacks that we can have, and that is obviously stronger than static biometric. So it could be that users speak prompted face and the server verifies both the voice and the phrase, and access can be granted. So here are some attacks, potential attacks on a given table, some authenticators and typical defenses against these attacks. The first attack that we could have is a client attack, and the attacker would try to guess or fake the credentials, and the affected authenticators are going to be passwords, actual tokens, or biometrics, and this is going to have a high entropy. So there is limited attempts. This is how we avoid it. And I think a lot of students mentioned that is to limit the number of attempts that attacker could assign in. The host attack that we have is secret or template that is stolen from the server. And the way we can kind of have a defense against those is hashing, protected storage, or a challenge response, as we see. For eavesdropping or theft, we can have like multi-factor authentication or tamper resistance. And for replay attacks, we can use challenge responses or one-time values. And then we have Trojan and denial of service. They can affect all types of authenticators. And what we can do is also rate the limit similar to client attacks for denial of service. And we can have trusted devices or secure authentication for Trojan horse. So here is kind of like a given architecture and networks across kind of like a biometric authentication method that is involving networks, is that we have kind of three different workstations, and each of those has a scanner. And then clients obviously will identify themselves, and if they are not registered, they will be registered and stored in the IRIS database. And the type of authentication method that is being used here is IRIS. So we have kind of a scanner with each workstation to verify and identify the users. And we have a LAN switch. We know LANs forward information, or you can say request or data. We don't need to use a router here. We have IRIS engines here. Does anyone know why we have two IRIS engines here instead of one? So we have an IRIS database and we have two IRIS engines, or you can say two different servers. Yes? Redundancy. Okay. Yeah. So the idea is that obviously having two can handle traffic much more in a faster kind of fashion. And we have kind of an IRIS merge remote that can kind of also supply these kind of IRIS engines if needed. So I think everyone has a bank. They have some sort of kind of obviously their credentials with a bank. And this kind of case study talks about ATM security problems. And this was a case study that was discovered by Redspin. And this kind of case study affected small ATMs or mid-sized ATMs. And it showed that cryptography itself does not really guarantee security. Okay. So security depends not only on cryptography, but the actual design and implementation. Okay, so the key lesson here is that we have strong encryption is useless if the actual kind of given design is insecure. Okay. So some notations you can say or key roles that are important in this case study is that we always have a card holder. This is where we talked about the actual token that is kind of to be used to verify the information of the user. It's going to be a person, debit, or a pen. The issuer is like a bank account, or you can say an entity that we are trying to get access to that owns the account. And then we have a processor. There's like a third-party service that handles PIN verification, account updates, or funds transfer. This is what happens when you go to an ATM. And we have EFT networks. So those are going to be like regional or global ATM networks that can supply these many ATMs like Visa or Star. So what happens here is that, and this is kind of like secured, how we originally had it, is point-to-point connection. Have anywhere in network know what lease lines are or T3 lines? So usually what T3 lines are is that ATMs directly connect to the processor. There is no kind of an ISP. Even if there's an ISP here in the middle, they are really just there to provide that service, but they don't have any access to the information that is being sent. That's why it's kind of like point-to-point connection to the processor. So there is really nothing that is being interfered between the processor and the issuer. Okay, so it is point-to-point. So we cannot have no kind of attacks or issues with that. So that is using leased or virtual lease lines. So there's minimal exposure to the network. So the ATM we have here and the issuer have kind of a point-to-point communication with the processor. And that also has a point-to-point with the EFT exchange, as we mentioned. So how the transaction works is that you would kind of enter your card, you would put a PIN, and that PIN is encrypted using DES. When we know that DES is no longer kind of to be used. So the encrypted message is going to be sent to the processor that we have here, and the processor authorizes the transaction. So the benefit of that is it's hard to intercept the traffic. We cannot have man-in-the-middle attacks. We cannot have replay attacks with here, but it's a limited attack surface. So that is why kind of we have this new ATM architecture, which is cost-driven. And what changed here is that we have an internal kind of network that is here, issuer internal network. And that issuer kind of maintains a one-time connection to the processor. So it moves from kind of point-to-point to shared connection. So we have the ATM, we have the issuer, we still have those processors, but here's what changed is that, and then there's really lower networking costs. So that is kind of like why banks change. Easier ATM management, and there's pressure to adopt to triple DES, kind of an advanced encryption algorithm that we have covered. So where are the security kind of vulnerabilities or kind of problems that could appear is that only the PIN is encrypted with the DES or the triple DES. Other information that is being kind of sent over the channel that you might think is not necessary, but it is in the given idea that we have like Trudy here or kind of an actor, malicious actor, is that anything that can be sent like a card number, expiration date, account balance, withdrawal amount is going to be kind of interceived. So that is the exposure point, is that data will travel through the issuer or you can say through the issuer internal network. And that network may be reachable by the internet, via the internet. So that is why connection point base or lease lines are kind of important here. So the confidentiality failures that we have is that the attackers can steal card numbers, expiration dates, or account informations. And with those, they can do fraudulent online purchases, card cloning, and much more. There's also integrity that fails here. So there is no protection against message modifications or message injections. And attackers can masquerade as an ATM or a processor. It can trigger unauthorized cash dispensing or alter balances or transfers. So what was done right is that PIN encryption was upgraded from DES to triple DES, and we encrypt all the customer data. Now, that is what's being happened. So not only we encrypt the PIN, but we only encrypt the customer data as well. So we reduce the networking cost, but we solve the issue with obviously encrypting everything that is being sent. We also use message integrity, so we use hashes. We have mutual authentication between the ATM and processor. We have protection against replay attacks. So encrypting one field does not really protect the entire transaction. We only had to protect the PIN first, but did not protect the entire transaction. So the case kind of teaches when we wrap about authentication is that security is a system property that we have. There is cost-saving architectural changes that can introduce major risks. So cryptography must be combined with secure networking, authentication that we talked about in this chapter, integrity protection, which we cover in chapter 2 with hashing, and a securing algorithm that can be used and kind of encryption that can be kind of insecure. It still results in insecurity. So this is kind of the summary of chapter 3, is that we talked about electronic user authentication. We talked about the model, the architecture model of how users gain credentials. We talked about means of authentication. We talked about how we can assess user authentications on a cross-up based on levels and different ranges. We talked about password-based authentication. So like what passwords are, vulnerabilities of passwords, types of password attacks, how passwords are stored in given systems, the idea of hashing and salts being stored in passwords, and we kind of demonstrated how that happens with password attacks. Today we covered token-based authentication, which is something that you have, and biometric authentication, which is something that you are. And we know that there is obviously a cost that comes with biometric authentication versus token-based. We talked about remote user authentication that has kind of using channels of given networks, and we know how we can kind of have replay attacks to avoid these replay attacks or man-in-the-middle attacks by using some sort of challenge with authentication. And we talked about security issues for user authentication, and we wrapped with a case study. Okay, so that is what we have for chapter 3. Does anyone have any questions on this chapter? Anything, raise of mind, concern, class related? Okay, so that is good. We will just take attendance very quick, and then I will see you guys next week. Oh, one thing. So if you have not downloaded VirtualBox and like a VM, a hypervisor, and Kali VM, when you do download it, you need to you need to download it the traditional way of us downloading it. So I have a video on our modules. We covered that also in a class that is dedicated, such that when you create your Kali Linux, you need to have your name on there. So it should not be the traditional Kali at Kali. Your name needs to be in there for that we can kind of use for assessment when it comes to grading assignments. Okay, so do not download Kali that with the typical with the second approach that I have talked about. Download it the way I have installed it fully. So let me just show that real quick. So when you are at this page in Kali, there's two options, and the way that I have done it in the video and the lecture as well is always installer images, and that is like a step-by-step downloading where we do kind of modifying the kind of step-by-step to reach Kali Linux. You have the virtual images, and this comes as preloaded. So you just download Kali, you download the VirtualBox and load it. You don't have to do any of step-by-step kind of setting up an installation. The issue with that is your credentials will always be Kali at Kali. Okay, you can do a user account on there, but that's not the best option. So follow the installer images, download the ISO file that you have for your given architecture, and just follow the steps to download it. There's a lot of resources out there. You can watch the video recording, and you can stop by office hours of mine, the TAs, and we can get you that installed correctly. Okay, so let us take attendance very quick, and you guys will be good to go. I'm going to end the meeting on Zoom.